If you spend any time in the e-commerce world, you'll notice something very interesting. And that is that almost all the advice out there is around getting new customers. It's about ad strategies, better creatives, different hacks, new channels to use. And don't get me wrong, those things do matter. Of course, everyone wants more customers. But for most growing e-commerce founders that I speak to, the real constraint on their growth is actually their capacity and the way that the founders are using their time. They're already able to generate some sales and they have an acquisition channel, but they're also still involved in so much of the business. They're still handling customer issues and checking orders, making sure fulfillment's sorted, solving operational issues, approving everything. And so it means that their focus is spread thin. And trying to grow the business at the same time as managing the business day to day means their time and their headspace is fragmented. And those are the two things that are required to actually scale a brand successfully. So what happens is the business keeps running day to day, but there's never a breakthrough to that next level. Not because the opportunity isn't there, but it's because the founder is too caught up in the operations day to day. And that is exactly what I want to talk about today. There's what I call the founder bottleneck. Now, before we dive in, a little bit of context on me as somebody that can share this with you. Over the past 5 years, I've scaled my own e-commerce brand past $2 million in revenue. And more importantly, I've built the systems and the team that allow it to run with just 30 minutes of my involvement every single day. Alongside that, I've now built my agency, Forte, and I help other e-commerce business owners to install the same operational infrastructure. That's the systems, SOPs, specialist VAs, so their businesses stop depending on them day to day. So what I'm sharing today is not just theory. It's based on the exact approach that I've used to scale my business and the founders that I'm working with. It's getting away from the things that most people get wrong and get caught up in ads, creative, new channels, etc. and moving towards the real problem that I see people have, the real constraint. And it's not always demand. A lot of times it's the founder capacity. Now, how does this occur? Now, this can be a deadly constraint for businesses because what I see happen is far too many founders of e-commerce brands focus too much on acquisition. And what I mean by that is when you get started, you're taught and you realize that you need to generate sales. And so business owners dive headfirst into generating sales at all costs, and they get very used to, they get rewarded for being very hands-on in their business initially. But when your orders are coming in and your customers are buying, what happens is your operations is going to swell as those orders come up. And if the founder is still involved in every operational layer of that business, growth is going to slow down because you're going to plateau at the level that the founder can push you to. And so because the founder's running out of time and headspace, you can no longer scale. But you haven't yet learned the secret to the next level of business because what got you to this point was grafting and working really hard and working your socks off. And so you've taught yourself that you just need to work harder. But actually, it's all about removing yourself as the bottleneck. And that's what it looks like in practice. And this does a good example of showing you what it's like to be the bottleneck in your business. Is ultimately everything runs back to you. Customer support questions, order issues, supplier conversations, inventory decisions, approving refunds in certain cases, maybe approving campaigns to go live, approving everything day to day. And the business isn't running on systems, it's running on your judgment as the founder and your attention. But ultimately that's fragile because one person as an operational center of the business is going to run out of energy and it's not going to be sustainable for the long-term growth of the business. Now, the biggest risk that I see people miss here is not failure. It's that most of these businesses are actually working, they are generating sales, revenue is growing, customers are buying, but the real risk is something else. It's that the founder ends up running the operations day to day of their business for the next 5 years. What I mean by that is the revenue can grow, but operational complexity is just going to grow even faster than how fast your business can grow. And that the founder's time quietly becomes the ceiling of the business and how far it can grow. And so it caps the growth eventually, but also it's going to burn out a founder pretty fast. If you've felt those feelings of being involved every day and everyone relying on you, you'll know very quickly that that is not going to be something that's sustainable. So perhaps you've tried to overcome this in the past. And let's talk about something that I see going wrong too quickly and too often when people try and remove this. The first thing you think about is, right, this is all about delegation. I need to delegate the task that I'm doing. However, you need to approach that with caution. Maybe you've had some bad stories of delegation in the past, and maybe you just need to learn this before you get it wrong. Because why does just delegation on its own fail? Well, founders in that situation, when they're feeling burnt out, they're going to hire help. Sometimes that's in the form of a virtual assistant. Sometimes that's in the form of a friend or someone that you know of to bring in just to help you out. And what they do is they start outsourcing tasks. and maybe they start delegating pieces of work, sending messages to people to say, this is what I'd like you to work on today. But something very strange happens when they do that, is instead of getting relief, they just end up getting more questions every day, more interruptions when they're trying to do work on the business, more things needing approval. And the founder, you start thinking to yourself, I hired help, but this actually didn't solve the problem. This is just giving me more work. They call this the delegation trap that we can get into if we're not careful. What happens is you hire help, but then the person doing work still needs guidance because you haven't outsourced it fully. And so ultimately every unusual situation is still escalating back to the founder, like refund decisions or supplier issues or inventory questions or exceptions for customers that hasn't been seen before. And so the founder is still the approval layer for everything that hire was meant to be doing. And eventually they just think, well, actually, it's faster if I just do this myself rather than explaining how it's done to a team member. So they take the work back from the person they initially hired to take the work off them, and the cycle is just going to repeat over and over again. And the reason this happens is because when they tried to delegate, they removed the task, but they didn't remove the dependency on themselves to get that task completed. So how do we overcome that? The way to overcome it is through systems. Systems must come first before delegation. So without the systems in place, without removing the dependency on you, work is going to be very unpredictable. And the people that you hire to do that work that you want to relieve yourself of, they don't know what good looks like. And so they don't really know what decisions they can make or what they need to refer back to you. So without these clear guidelines in place, everything will escalate and ultimately escalate back to you, land on your plate. You'll start to decide that it's quicker to do things on your own again, and you'll never fully remove yourself from the business. So the goal when we're delegating and we're handing things away is not about just handing off tasks that we're doing. It's about removing the founder, removing yourself from the decision path, full stop. So how do we do this, and how do I visualize this with businesses that I work with? So there are two core systems for every e-commerce business: the revenue system and the fulfillment system. So your revenue system is how customers find you and buy. So everything before the purchase. That's your marketing, your ads, your content, retention. And most founders are spending a huge amount of time improving this system. But the second system, the second part of your business, is the fulfillment system. And this is where things usually break. The fulfillment system includes everything after the purchase. So how are you getting the value that you've sold to your customers? So that's fulfillment, that's returns, is all handled in this side of things. And it's making sure that you deliver the value to your customers. But ultimately, that's where things usually get broken initially. And it breaks because the founder gets trapped in this side of the business, because it's where all of your operational complexity is. And if the system is not structured for how you deliver value to your customers, ultimately, the founder is going to stay as the default operator in that situation. So every exception from the usual customer situation flows back to them. Every decision of how to handle certain situations flows back to the founder. And before long, the founder is essentially the operational engine of the business. And so the antidote to this is systems. And systems will create leverage for you in your business. When your business is structured into the systems that operate the day-to-day running of your business, something very important happens. All your knowledge as a founder is removed from your head and put virtually on paper, whether that's in Google Docs form or anything, but it's taken out of your head crucially and put onto paper for other people to understand how does the business work. And that is in the form of SOPs. So standard operating procedures, they capture how things are done in your business day to day. And now every good SOP, what that then does is it makes the ownership very clear for who is responsible for that system, how that part of the business is operated. So, for example, when we work with an e-commerce brand, we'll make sure that we take the knowledge from the business and how things are being done, putting them into SOPs, which sometimes have been created before, sometimes haven't, but it's up to us to get that knowledge out of our heads onto paper so we can see how does the business handle a return? How does the business fulfill an order? How does the business handle a warranty situation or this, that, and the other kind of situation? Everything that could possibly happen in the business needs to get done and into a knowledge base or a Bible for that business. And so we've captured how things are done. And then, as I say, every SOP that's good will become very clear with who owns everything. So we have a responsible member of the team for every process within that business. And we make sure they're responsible from start to finish. And they can report on how they are, how they're doing with that process and they're under their responsibility. So we don't keep going back to the founder for approvals on anything there. And we set the standards with these SOPs, and we set how things are going to be done moving forward. So we don't need to constantly decide or think about these situations. We just follow the standards that are laid out in front of us. And every time we've done this for founders, immediately we have so much headspace that we regain as founders of an e-commerce business, because the systems operate it for us. The people handling those systems can follow it without needing to come to us. And think about it for your business. If you could double the amount of time that you were spending on actually growing the business, how much faster would you grow if you weren't bogged down by the day-to-day things? Ultimately, you'd be able to delegate with confidence, and you'd know for a fact that things would get done to the standards that you set for your baby of a business, and you make sure that it gets done without you needing to be involved day in, day out. Now, there's something important. Once you've put systems in place and we've documented how the business runs, there's also something to be said about the quality of people that we put in place to handle those systems. So how do we hire specialists? Well, if you've been through the hiring process before, whether it's VAs or an internal employee, the way we find the best quality of standard is to have a very self-vetting application process. What I mean by self-vetting is we're going to set very clear standards that we expect for somebody to follow when they apply to the position. And so with VAs, I use the site onlinejobs.ph for all the VAs that I've hired from the Philippines. And to find specialists and real winning players, it's all about making the requirements that you expect them to come back for super clear. And anyone that doesn't follow those instructions show you that they don't follow instructions for an application, and so they won't follow instructions no matter how detailed your systems are in the business. So make it clear that they need to provide a voice note, they need to provide an English grammar score test, they need to provide you with an Easter egg, not a chocolate Easter egg, but actually an Easter egg where we're hiding a request for a photo of an animal, for example, in the job application, so we can test their attention to detail, and we're asking them to provide their CV. And you'll be surprised at how many people miss these requirements and so immediately self-disqualify themselves from the business. But it's important that you're thorough in that application process and you're finding out who can follow instructions best and who can present themselves professionally to yourself on an interview, as well as being able to do that with customers moving forward. Now, when you've got the systems in place, when you've got the right people that you've vetted strongly, we then can move from being an operator in our business to being the owner. It changes everything. It changes the way that you show up in your business if you're fully embracing the role of an owner rather than just the operator of the business day to day. Do you think before, when you're an operator, ultimately you're the one that's behind every decision, every task still runs through you, every escalation, and the business is ultimately the founder. Now, we all have egos. I think as a founder of a business, we still all like to think that we've got something special we can give to the business. Yes, that's why we start it in the first place. But if we don't allow ourselves to get out of the way of our business can only grow to the level that we can bring it to. And so after getting systems in place, after hiring specialists, the business is now running day to day through structure and through the people we've hired, and the founder, that role changes to being an owner. It changes to focusing on growth, to partnerships, to product, to strategy, to all these different amazing ideas that you see on Instagram or YouTube about how you can scale your business. They're all useless unless you have the time to actually focus on them. So get the systems in place, get the team in place to handle the day-to-day, and then you'll know that your time will be spent on the things that actually grow the business. And ask yourself, how much more can I grow? How much more will I enjoy my business? How much more will I learn day-to-day if I'm not bogged down in the day-to-day running of the business, if I can step back and actually implement the income generating things that I know are going to move my business forward. Now, you've seen the transition that you need to go through in order to be an owner of your brand and not just the operator within it. Now, the actions that you can take away and immediately implement into your business to get started on this process is to start auditing your time. Look at how you're spending your time. Are you an operator or are you an owner? Or maybe you're an operator for 75% of the time and you only feel like an owner during a certain part of the day. Think about and being intentional about how you're spending your time. Some people are great at looking back at their calendars or thinking back to how their day and their week has gone. Other people need to set a 15-minute reminder on their phones to remind them to make a note of how they're spending their time so they can start to become intentional with how they're spending their time. Once you've done that, make a list from top to bottom of highest revenue activity, the things that lead to the most revenue, all the way down to things that lead to the least revenue, with all the actions that you take. And also consider in that list as well, which things actually need you as a business owner. what you'll do from all those tasks that you do, maybe there's 20, 30 things on your plate every day that you do as a business owner, and you rank them in order of importance that you do them and revenue generation, we'll start by giving away or systemizing the tasks that are at the bottom of that list. So these are the things that generate the least revenue and don't need you in order to do that. When you have those tasks, the first thing before we just hire and give them away is to think about the system, the process or the steps that you follow in order to get those completed. The quicker we can document those, the better. Either we put them in an SOP list where you just write down bullet points of how you do it, or even better, if you can use a tool like Loom to record your screen and you narrate as you go through that process, you've then got a transcript to turn into an SOP and you've got a video to demonstrate how you've done something. And start working your way through those things from bottom to top of giving things away one at a time or having a system in place ready. Then when you have systems in place for how you can give things away, that's when we'll then reach out to specialists, and we have a high criteria, high threshold for who we're going to accept in an application process to give those tasks to. For e-commerce, making sure that customer service is given away as quickly as possible, but also the fulfillment system, the back end part of the business, that is the operations that makes your business run day to day and make sure your customers have a great service. Those things can be managed outside of you by specialists. Bring the people on board to gradually give more and more away. The only time this is finished is when you feel like you're in a position where you wake up every day excited to work on the things that truly move the needle. And your day should look like one or two things at the top of that list where you're generating revenue directly, where you are directly doing things that only you can do in the business, and you'll know your day is well spent. And the day-to-day running of the business is still handled and actually done to a better standard because the people running them are not burnt out. Now, I have the opportunity to reward the people who have been watching to this point and taking in the information. And so I have a free gift, essentially, to give to you. If you are at that stage where you are making consistent sales, but you're still deeply involved in the day-to-day running of your brand, then the next step is probably not another marketing trick. Ultimately, it's about identifying where you've become the bottleneck operationally in your business. Because until that's removed, your growth will always be capped, and we need to remove that operational bottleneck in order for you to spend time on things that matter most. So what I've done for this, I have opened up a number of free e-commerce operations audits, and it is a 30-minute diagnostic call with me where we will talk about all things operations within your business, and we will go through and identify first, where is the biggest operational bottleneck? Where does that actually sit in your business? Second, what's the highest leverage hire that would remove the most work from you immediately? And third, we'll talk about the systems needed so that delegation actually sticks this time. No pitch on the call. I really just want to give more value to the market. And this is my opportunity to help you further alongside this video as well, to actually walk this through with you in terms of your specific business situation. If that would be helpful to you, let me know. You can use the link that's provided or go directly to jameserdley.co.uk/audit. Also, if you feel free to follow me on Instagram, I'm most active on there. And if you send me a message and ask me for an audit on there as well, then we can get that arranged. So look forward to speaking with you soon, and I hope you got value from this today.